So welcome back. We continue in the 7th chapter of Shaykh Emunah. We pretty much spent, perhaps maybe even too much of last week's class, the information or the introduction or what the content of this Pedic Zayin is all about, and how it follows the Pedic Vav, and as Pedic Vav is a follow-up, important follow-up of Pedic Dalet. Remember we said Pedic Hey is an interesting, unique entry into the, or a unique insert into the whole segment of Shaykh Emunah. So we'll go as such straight into the text. So that is on page, so again, Pedic Shaykh Emunah, the second segment of the Sefer Tanya. We always mention, we say Shaykh Emunah, simply it's the gateway of oneness and faith, which the Alter Rebbe so brings us into in ways which are probably unprecedented. We mentioned last week, you go into that gate, you're never going to come out the same way as you entered. You could say with maximum certainty. And so that is Pedic Zayin. We're holding the Tam Hatzimtzum, V'Hester Hazeh. So we began, and this is what we explained last week, it's kind of an overall statement, Shema Yisrael Yichudi Lo, Baruch Shem Kvein Machudei, the supreme oneness, the Baruch Shem Kvein Machudei, which we recite. Remember we said it doesn't say it in the Torah, we gave a little bit of the backdrop where this comes from. But we say it as we say Kriya Shema, it's part and parcel of Kriya Shema, Baruch Shem Kvein Machudei L'Olam Vod, that is the inferior oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which again is a strong, loaded statement, which needed a bit of explanation. I think, again, we elaborated on it. So we'll go straight towards, we'll continue immediately. So that's Pedic Zayin, page 162, the original text. And we're starting from Kihine, which is the fourth line from the chapter, the end of the fourth line of the chapter. To note, as we usually do, namely for newcomers, to see the message of Pedic Zayin, and again as it follows Pedic Vav, to see the which is pretty much this last class, and to see all the classes of Shaykh Emunah. You can find it on wherever you're watching it, but it's always worthwhile to go onto the original site, tanyaonline.com. Again, we mentioned the advantage, the way it's set up, that the text is in a separate scroll bar as such. It's easy to follow the class, or we always mention wherever you're learning Tanya, Koi L'choi. The advantage also on this website is that you have easy access to all the previous classes of Shaykh Emunah, as we mentioned, also of the entire the Likutei Amorim, which we were able to conclude, to learn for some time, and conclude Be'ezras Hashem Yizbarich. And again, the advantage, it comes up in the same fashion. So this beginning of Pedic Zayin, again, we spent quite some time last week, so it's probably worthwhile to have an appreciation of these four lines at the beginning of Pedic Zayin before you go on. Again, you could find it wherever you find it. Because it's quite central to this Pedic and the overall message of Shaykh Emunah, the Yichudi Lo, the supreme oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as opposed to Yichudi Tato, which is the inferior oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is reflected via the state, the information and the words of Baruch Shem Kveid Malchusei L'Olam Vod. So we continue. The reason and the motive of Hashem for this contraction and this concealment, which HaKadosh Baruch Hu hid and concealed the life and energy with which would ultimately establish this appearance as a world which is separated from its source. In other words, why in the world would would Hashem begin this process? Because what is the finished game, apparently, on the surface at least? It ends up in total concealment of the reality of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And this whole dichotomy that on one hand, there is no other energy, which is Mahava Machai Mekayim, is giving life and existence to this world, and every detail of the world. It's soul existence, and the underscoring soul existence, because it's not like we said, body and soul, or a device and a battery, or the electricity. It's nothing like that. It's the entire energy of any part of creation is only HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the energy which Hashem imbues in it, and I say imbues in present tense, because it's not only Hashem created the world 6,000, the beginning of the 6,000 years, which is the beginning of creation, the first 6 days of creation, that is, but which is a central theme in the Alter Rebbe, in this Sharich of Emunah, as the Alter Rebbe, the first page expounds on this, that it's every single moment Hashem is revitalizing creation. So you look at a stone, Hashem is right now pumping energy into the stone, which makes the entire stone exist. And if Hashem pulls back the energy, that's right, the stone will disappear. So the entire energy of the stone is a HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yet the stone looks so real, the world looks so real. Every part of the world, which on its own, it's solely, 100% of it is the Dvar Hashem, the godly energy, which is giving it life and existence, which one would suggest that it should demonstrate that 100%, yet what we see is a world which not only doesn't demonstrate, proclaim the Hashem Echad, its own existence, but it obscures it, it conceals it. And as the Alter Rebbe explained, where does that come from? How could that be? And the Alter Rebbe goes on in Perek Daled, which is, again, this is really an important novelty of the Alter Rebbe, explaining that it's just another meat of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that he's able to cover up, he's able to extend himself, and he's able to contract that very energy that he is extending from himself, which is the Chesed, the Gvura, again, see it in Perek Daled, a click away, which is, again, the Alter Rebbe introduces this idea, it's only the Eibishter's Gvura, it's not a real concealment, it's a cover-up with the Eibishter established in order that the world should look like it does, that the world should be Mailam and Master, should conceal over the Dvarat, over the truth of the Emes Hashem La'ila. So once we know, again, the message of the Alter Rebbe, once we know it's just Hashem's, like we gave the example, somebody could be taken and put in, locked up for 6 hours in a room, and then obviously to them it's catastrophic. To the individual who's thrown into a room and closes the door, and the door closed behind them, it's catastrophic for them, and it would immediately enter this hysteria, locked up, and just when someone feels that forcefully they were locked up, or somebody has an exam the next morning and they just go into the room for 6 hours, they lock the door behind them, they don't feel any type of confinement, in other words, any type of a state, a spirit of confinement, not at all for that matter, because they put themselves in this situation, in this state, for a reason that they have. And so there's no real, they're not being locked up, they're just utilizing the opportunity to seclude themselves for their own benefit in order to be able to concentrate or get a good mark, like we spoke about it, giving examples of an exam the next morning. That's their whole purpose, why they're putting themselves in such a situation. But there's no concept over here of them being locked up, locked out, not at all. And the same thing, it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu put that cap of Gvura, that the world should appear the way it is. And as the Gemara says, Eilam Lashon Helam V'Hester, you look at the world, you don't have to learn about it in Sharich of Emunah. Does the world demonstrate the Hashem Echad, the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? The world on its own proclaim, I am nothing else but the energy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Not really, as we all know it, and it's evident to all. We have to find it. We have to seek it and find it and extract that emes Hashem La'elam. And so the question is, why did Hashem do this? Why did Hashem do this? We were Bachrim in 770. There was a famous, he was like an iconic iconic image. To take a little bit of l'chaim pretty often, but he was very wise. Sometimes between the breaks, and just there was a kind of a relaxing moments. A few moments, you always saw a few of the yeshiva boys gathered around him just to hear a little bit of his wisdom. He had a certain spark in his eye all the time, like a wise appearance. His eyes drew wisdom for sure. And especially after Little Chaim, his words were also, many of his words, the sayings, the words of wisdom. So he quoted the first Rashi in Chumash, humorously and naturally. He was a good Jew, ultimately. Interesting. His name was Zalman. And he quoted this Rashi, the first Rashi. Rashi says, Lo yitzarech lahaschil elo mi in other words, the Torah, which Torah is about Torah is about telling us what to do, and should it begin with the first mitzvah, why did Torah begin with Bereshis bara Elokim Hashem V'aretz, which is about creation, which is kind of separate of what Torah is all about? Apparently, Rashi gives the famous Rabbi Yitzchak, and it actually begins on Rabbi Yitzchak, and the answer that Hashem wanted to Koyach Ma'asav Higid La'ami L'Sazlem Nachzul, going to that the world should appreciate that Hashem is the sole creator, and Hashem created the world, and Hashem gave Eretz Yisrael to Am Yisrael when He decided to give it. So the Torah itself, just for that reason, establishes like who, not only who's in charge, who created all this, and there should never be a question who Eretz Yisrael belongs to. Hashem Yitzeini Not L'Mehem V'Nas L'Lanu, whatever Rashi says, and he used to say, pause after Lo Yitzarech L'Haschil, because Amr Rabbi Yitzchak Lo Yitzarech L'Haschil. It would be preferable if Hashem never began this process, because look what it ended up in a world which it's not ended up. It's again, this is with precise decision, step after step, and this whole Seder Ishtalshelus, as we mentioned, the terminology say the Ishtalshelus time and again in the past, that it ended up from Atzilus to Bria, which each Olam has less of the obvious, the Elokus is less obvious in every Olam as it descends one level after another, and in the end, Hashem created a physical world, which equal to every single world, equal to Atzilus, that in the end of the day, it's only about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There's nothing else other than HaKadosh Baruch Hu, similar to the spirit of Atzilus. The only thing in Atzilus, it's demonstrative. Everything about Atzilus is about Elokus. It's obvious. Atzilus, everything, the truth is very obvious in Atzilus, but as it evolves one element after the other, which each one is another hell of a hester, that's what makes it a lower world, not to go into it now. And what is created, Elamasiya Gashmis, which is a world which denies, and it's it's about me, it's not about, don't talk to me about creator, and that's the kind of the fabric of Elam Haza, is kind of presenting only that, and we have to take away the outer veneer and be Megala, and this Hashem La'elam. So why did Hashem do it? Why did Hashem begin this process? Why did Hashem allow the Gvura to put, what was the point of putting on the cap of Gvura? Wouldn't it be better if it would be just Shem Havaya or Lo Yitzarech L'Haschil? Why begin the process? Isn't it better that everything is part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? And everything is subsumed, consumed into the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, where there's no room for Eilam, as the famous Eitz Chaim. The Alter Rebbe quotes the Arizal and before the Tzimtzum, everything was part of the Ein Sof. That's the best scenario one could think. It's just blissful. There's nothing. It's just Hashem, and everything is part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So why did Hashem create it, and why did Hashem begin this process? Again, I just mentioned because it was interesting. It falls into Gitam B'Sibas HaTzimtzum. We have to look for a reason. To say again, that word, he said Lo Yitzarech L'Haschil, pause. He says, nah, shouldn't begin this process. But humorously, naturally, he used to say this. So the question is, we have to look for a reason. Why did Hashem do all this? So he answers, that's right. Hashem wanted, had a desire that the world should take a look at something, a separate entity on its own. And why so? So again, this is part of the master plan. Yad Hashem, it begins with the Tzimtzum Harishain, we spoke about in the past, and then eventually allows everything to evolve. And what to be created? A physical world, which on its own, it seems like it's not the truth, not even a bit. Meaning to say that it makes it clear that all of every part of creation, its existence is only the Dvar Hashem. It's only because Hashem is pumping energy into it. That's all. And why does it look like? Why does it look the way it does? Because Hashem put on that cap of Gvura. So again, we have to know them from the perspective of Hashem Olakim, and that itself gives us the ability to see the Emes Hashem, because we know it's all Hashem. It's two expressions of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Chesed, which is the energy to create, which is an expression of the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And then we know that Gvura is also coming from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so it's easier for us to navigate through the process of revealing the Emes Hashem Leilam, granted. But it was with precise, the whole idea of Hashem putting on this cap of Gvura was with a precise decision that the world should appear on its own the way it does, separate from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Independent of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Why would Eibishter want to do that? Why would Eibishter allow a situation that from him himself should be created a world, or that two midas, the Chesed and Gvura, should establish such a phenomenon of a world which doesn't demonstrate the emes, and to such a degree, Davar Nifrod B'fnei Atzmai, it seems like a separate entity when it's truly not. Why would Hashem desire that? Lashon and Baal Terebbe comes even stronger in Perek Lamed Vav in Tanya, a world which not only doesn't align itself with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but it has a whole beautiful sikh over here as he dissects these words in Perek Lamed Vav, that it's not only a world that doesn't demonstrate HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but to the contrary, a world which says neged Hashem, not only neutral. I'm not here to tell you what the emes is. No, beyond that, neged Hashem, it has an opposite message. Leimer aniva afsiyai, famous words of the Haftarah. Or in Pari, aniva afsiyai, it's about really me. Don't talk to me about Hashem. Don't talk to me about the emes. That's a chayshach, a darkness, lashon. In many, it's expressed in many, starting from the Talmud, chayshach kafel u'mechupel. In so many different dimensions of the Haftarah, that it's not only a chayshach, a darkness, it's kafel mechupel, it's a double and quadruple chayshach. Why would HaKadosh Baruch Hu want a world? Here he just speaks about the idea of this, the world being a separate, kaviyachol, appearing to be a separate entity, appearing naturally. But this was part of the master plan. And it's part of that overall Yis'ava Kodesh Baruch Hu, which we quote quite frequently, which this is the premise of the entire reason for creation. Yis'ava HaKodesh Baruch Hu is L'dina B'tachtenim. HaKodesh Baruch Hu wanted, desired, it was a taiva, it was a deep desire, a motive to have a dwelling place, B'tachtenim, in an inferior world. Inferior, obviously not demographically, understandably, we're not talking about inferior as opposed to superior, first floor, second floor. Inferior, which means this is the inferiority of Elam Haza, that a world which on its own does not demonstrate the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and to the contrary, as noted, that which classifies that as Tachtainim, devoid of its own truth, and the Yid should come there and be megala mem b'semes Hashem leilam. In other words, the Yid would reveal through his learning Torah and doing mitzvahs. And kol masechel l'shem shamayim, kol derech echad was mentioned by extension of his Torah mitzvahs, like famous Rambam brought in the Tur, and famous Rambam, and again the Tur has a whole siman of that it's about the 24 hours which the Yid elevates and sublimates Elam Haza, and namely reveals with it Elam Haza, the emes Hashem, the truth. This is the one that one line. Again, it's Parshas Nasei and Medrash Tanchuma, and for this the Eibishter did all that because he had a taiva. But why did he want that But we know, we spoke about it last week, I believe it was, the famous expression, avatayvis concussion. Don't ask, he didn't say, I'm going to explain you why, that you could start rationalizing why you think maybe it shouldn't have happened, even though it would be irrelevant, but at least it would be based on seichel. So then there's room for argument. No, it didn't start with seichel. Nis ava kodesh baruch hu. The Eibishter wanted, desired, a taivas, kinkashinish. Don't ask questions again, expression of the Rebbe Rashab, of a taivas, kinkashinish. But that's what he wanted. So he wanted a did b'tachtenim. So he created a tachtenim. So he created a world which appears in a way that it's tachtein, meaning to say that it's devoid, that itself makes it a tachtein, a world on its own. It appears, again, it's not the emes, but it appears devoid of elokus, which covers up of the reality of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is caused through the Gvura of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and is totally manifest, namely in Elam Hazeh. That's what established this tachtein, that in order there should be the dira b'tachteinim, through via the tachtein, which means the Yiddah should come in and should start bringing in this awareness of the Emes Hashem on his own, via his own toil, via his own initiatives. Again, all predicated on the rules of Torah mitzvahs. In other words, his yigiyah, his toil, his assiduousness in his learning Torah, diligence with learning Torah and doing Hashem's mitzvahs, and bringing in through into his entire 24 hours the Emes Hashem, and again have the impact on his own lot in Elam Hazeh, and having the influence on his own immediate society, and then eventually everyone doing their share, the world itself comes to that awareness of Hashem Echad, which will come to total fruition when Mashiach comes. Kim Mola Ha'aretz Deis Hashem. Yeah, the truth will come to the surface, and that is what Mashiach is really all about. Consequently, Hashem will eradicate the spirit of impurity, which all naturally all these parts of the puzzle come together. Which that's what Mashiach's times are all about, the Emes Hashem La'elam. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu initially wanted it to come via the Tachtenim. Meaning to say that it's not about, I'm going to open the window, you open the window. And that's why Hashem allowed all this to unfold. Because you do it to know the ultimate reason and purpose for creation of the world, for the revelation of Hashem's reign, Hashem's royalty, Hashem's kingship in this world. And when you're talking about a king, ein melech b'lei am. So again, it really, the whole idea of dira b'tachtenim is beautifully woven into this concept, which he says you're talking about a king, a melech. It seems like a different, comes from a different angle, but it's the same idea. It's exactly the same idea. Ein melech b'lei am. When you're talking about a king is in a nation, not on children or ministers. True kingship is directly associated with a nation, and the nation are called Am. One of the reasons the nation are called Am, because they're not part of the inner circle of the king. Then you're not a king, good leader, father, and so on. Kingship is an Am, a nation which have that kind of duality. On their own, they're not part of the king's inner circle, but they submit themselves to the king. For that matter, Am is the lashon he brings. I believe he brings over here the lashon. Yes, Aimimais. The Gemara says, or it's brought also in Gemara. Number of places earlier in Shas it would be. You have in Psachim, famous the Gecholim Aimimais, as opposed to not Aimimais, which is the coals. You have the coal where you see the fire. Literally, not only it's hot, similar to the heat of the fire. You actually see the fire, you see the burning, the coal is the burning coal. Then you see a coal which you don't see the fire at all. It's kind of extinguished. It might be hot, but then once the fire is extinguished, it becomes less hot and less hot. You see, gecholim aimamis, they're kind of extinguished. You don't see the heat, and you can't identify that much, certainly not the fire, and then the heat itself subsides. And that's what Am is. Am is the fire of the king is not evident by the nation. when you come to talk about ministers or children, they're an extension. In other words, what the king is all about, the Gemara says a son is the thigh or the knee. In other words, an extension of the father. So whatever the father is all about, the son is like in the same spirit, in the same environment. And so to a minister. But a nation, is gecholim aimemes. It's already, the fire has been extinguished. And as such, the heat has been extinguished. And kind of, you see that separate, as such, it's kind of a separate entity from the king. But that's who the king reigns over. That's the king who the king rules over. Not, you don't become a king over your own children or ministers where the fire is still burning. It's it's extinguished already, but that's who you become a king over. And that works, and again, in a secular world as well. The whole idea of king is over a nation, not only over the close circle. You're not a king over them. Kingship is associated with am. So, ein melech balei am loshen aimemes, which are dvarim nifradim v'zorim u'rechekim mimalas hamelech, which are separate and alien and distant from the level of the king, from the spirit of the king. Because if you don't have many children, you could be a good leader, a good image, a good model, a loving father, and so on. But the word melucha, you can't be a melech over of your inner circle. If you have many children, you can be a melech over them. It's not melucha. You could be, again, a father figure, an important father figure, an example, a model, and educate your children in a way that they follow your important steps, or you as a healthy model. Granted, but melucha per se, kingship, reignship, doesn't exist over children. You can't even say the word melucha, and more so, even those who are out of the family, of the immediate family of the king. But nonetheless, if there's sarim levadim, if everybody is ministers, also there, it's the word king does not fit. It's not applicable, as we can all appreciate. It's Berev Am Dafka Hadras Melech. Only in the Rev Am, the magnitude of a Am, a nation, which are separate, they're not children, not ministers, and they submit themselves to the king. Oh, there you have the image of a king-subject relationship. You're not talking about a king which is a tyranny type of king, a tyrant type of king, and we're not talking about anything messy over here. We're talking about a good, healthy king-subject relationship. It's when there's the subject, it's when there's an entity which is out of the domain of the king, nor children nor ministers, and they submit themselves to the king. That's the healthy and true scenario of a king nation subject relation. Now the king becomes a king via the am, and the more the reiv am, the greater even the number, quantity. Obviously, quality is also an important factor, but namely the reiv am, the quantity of the nation, that brings out the hadras melech, the glory of the king. And therefore, if Hashem would just leave the window of chesed open, not put on that cap of gvura, you wouldn't have, we mentioned it time and again, there wouldn't be really no banim, no sarim. Everything is completely consumed into the infinity of Hakadosh Baruch Hu, because if anything finite stands no chance when the window of infinity is open. As the Lashon today, but batal b'mitzias, we spoke about it last week. Yichudei love, it's all about the oneness of Hakadosh Baruch Hu. But in this context, let's just understand. Even there would be something which recognizes over the overt presence of Hakadosh Baruch Hu, or transparently recognizes the presence of Hakadosh Baruch Hu. Overtly recognizes the presence of Hakadosh Baruch Hu, which means they live because they see similar, for example, to angels. Angels are on a different level. They're on a different plane. They're not part of the Elam Hazah. So that's why they always stand in this love and fear, and a constant love and fear of Hakadosh Baruch Hu, without any obstacles. They don't have anything of the messiness of Elam Hazah. Therefore, what do we say? By davening in Bechibras Gishma, Kula Mishabchim and Farim and Maritzim Magdishim and Lichim Hashem Kela Melech HaGodol HaKodesh V'Neir HaKodesh Shu V'chum Mekabel Malei Melech HaShamayim Zeh Mizeh, and Ba'ava V'Yira, and who they are, Ahuvim, Brurim, Kedoshim, Gibeirim, which are all terminologies of the celestial malachim, which stand always so close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Again, it's naturally close to mamish the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because of the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in the face of the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Malachim can't stand, because the Malachim at the end of the day are creation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Creation cannot stand in the face of true infinity. Everything is consumed. We spoke about the sun, Shemesh Ramagin Hashem Elikim. It's not you feel a little more warm, a little more hot, and there's a little discomfort, there's no synchronicity, the sun, the world, a bit too close, the world become completely consumed in the heat of the sun. This stands no chance. Even Malachim stand no chance in the face of the Ein Sof, that there has to be the concealment for that matter. The Malachim are Elam HaYitzira, Mabriz, and Malachim Elam HaSiyah. So because again, it's also part of it seemed from the original contraction, and namely more and more seemed something which allowed even Malachim to be, but nonetheless, they're not in a world which demonstrates that even Afsi'ay denies the reality of Kadosh Baruch Hu. They're in a very high level spiritual world, a celestial world. These are celestial beings. So what's the result? The result is they're constantly in excitement, to be close in excitement with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Constantly. This is default by them. It's not just like they daven for 45 minutes to get excited. Everything about them on a constant basis. Yitzim, Mishars, of different types of malachim. But one thing they have in common, they're all excited with HaKadosh Baruch Hu because they live in a spiritual plane. So that would be similar to Sari ministers or bunning children. And we're not talking about actually, the only ones that are called really children are Am Yisrael, B'nai B'chai Yisrael. But the way it's on the surface, you would compare them to children or ministers, but that's not where Hashem becomes a melech over them. He's not a king over them. These are too close. They're part of the inner circle, Kaviyachol, within HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Again, this is all even after certain simtsumim, contractions and so on, but in context over here, it's they live in a spiritual plane, they're part of the spiritual dynamic, so they're so close, there's a fire burning. Their gechalim, their kol is on fire. And they are on fire. In their motive, in their drive, their love of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, reverence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, this is default by them. But Hashem says, no, I want to be a melech al am, a king over a nation, and that is not applicable in those Olam Ruchnim, these spiritual worlds, celestial spiritual worlds, because then you're missing out on the Am, and if you're missing out on the Am, there's no Malchus. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted that he should be a Melech al Am Tachlis B'riyas Ha'olam. There should be a revelation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Malchus. And in order there should be the revelation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Malchus, you need an Am. And to create an Am, you create a world where the phenomenon of Am could exist and unfold and so on. And that's precisely in Elam Hazeh Tachtin, which is a world on its own, is devoid of the Emes Hashem. Not be'emes, again, the way it appears, Hashem puts on that cap of Gvura, in order that it should be a world which should appear in this fashion, a world which seems to be separate from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is, this is synonymous with the idea of separate, gecholim aimim, extinguished coals, and this Am should submit itself to HaKadosh Baruch Hu with Kabbalas, El Malchus Shemayim, accepting the yoke of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and as such, aligning itself with Hashem's Torah and Hashem's mitzvahs, learning Hashem's Torah, doing Hashem's mitzvahs. Again, the subservience of Am to a king. And again, for an Am, you have to create it ought to manifest in a way that the terminology Am could truly exist, and that is precisely in Elam Hazeh Tachtin, in this very physical world. A world which, on the surface, it doesn't seem, you don't see the revelation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and to the contrary, a world which denies, it's nifrat, it seems like it's separate from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but that world will submit itself to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's when HaKadosh Baruch Hu's desire comes to full fruition. He's a melech al am. Nisav HaKadosh Baruch Hu, these lidira b'tachteinim, and the tachtein, on their own, should find the Emes Hashem, submit itself to the Emes Hashem, align itself with the Emes Hashem, to the extent to influence an entire world, that the world should align itself perfectly with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which will come to fruition when Mashiach comes. But that's all via the tach, that's the submissiveness. Somebody who was part of the Am, it's not his submissiveness to the king ought to be compromised because he's always an Am. No, to the contrary. You start being an Am, a separate entity, but you work on it to submit yourself to the king. And the idea of Kabbalah Semach HaShamayim, for that matter, you find a certain bittul, a certain self-expression of self-nullification and self-subservience, of subservient expressions precisely sometimes by the Am. You know, the foot soldier is ready to go Mesiras Nefesh for the king, literally self-sacrifice. And for that matter, you don't see it so much by many times by sarim, by ministers. They always feel they're part of the elite, so there could be lacking in their bittul and their nullification to the king. So that at the end of the day, through the Am, you have the true bittul. You have the true submission and subservience of an Am. But where does it start from? It ought to start from a world which is nifrod. On the surface, it seems to be separated of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so a Am is created, or the notion of Am, which you don't see again, the energy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and they submit themselves to the Malchus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so they becomes a Melech al Am. Now, when you talk about Melech, that's that same Malchus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Sphira Malchus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which creates a world which would be separate, Kaviyachal, or would appear separate from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. As we mentioned, remember last week we spoke about the first, where the idea of Olam, the whole phenomenon of Olam comes into the picture, is precisely through Malchus. Everything higher than Malchus, the whole Metzias of world does not exist, as the Alter Rebbe makes it clear, as we can all appreciate. If you want to encapsulate in a few words, what defines Olam? Time and place. Higher than Malchus, no time, no place even exists. We spoke about this last week. Not in Torah, it's not Hashem has the dynamic eye, is able to see through 3,000 years. Where Torah comes from, there is no years, there's no place. The phenomenon of time only begins via Malchus. Remember we mentioned, that's why in the Pasuk, when it comes to Malchus, it says Hashem Melech, Hashem Malach, Hashem Yimlech, which is time, the phenomenon of time came into being. So then there's past, present, future, and we say Hashem reigns in past and present and future. And nothing is ultimately devoid of control, but higher than Malchus, there's no time. You mentioned that's the Shem Havaya, Hoya, Hoive, Biyeh, Ke'echad. There's no past, present, and future. The phenomenon of time begins with Malchus, and so to place, mocking. There's no mocking higher than Malchus. So this Melech, this Sphira of Malchus, that's the Melech we're talking about, which began this process. And then we mentioned the correlation between Malchus and Gvura, that the Gvura unfolds in the Sphira of Malchus. In other words, didn't we say higher than Malchus, there's no Mokim, there's no Zman, there's no place, there's no time, but isn't Gvura higher than Malchus? Gvura is the second one of the spheres, Chesed and Gvura. So apparently from Gvura there shouldn't also be this idea of time and time and place, but isn't Gvura that formal initial cap over the Chesed elaborated on Perik Dalid, which produces eventually Zman Mokim? Yes, it's the potential in which ultimately would come to fruition via Malchus. It is on its own. It is yet higher than Zman Mokim, higher than time and place, granted, but it's the source from where this would unfold eventually in Malchus. So he continues with Shema Meira Midas Malchus Baruch. What is the name which indicates on the Midah of Malchus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? That's the Shem Adnos. So we have a Shem Avaya and the Shem Aleph Dalet Nun Yud, which is about Adnos, domination. Adnos is in the context of Adoin Kol Ha'oretz. He brings it over to you, Adoin Kol Ha'oretz. He's master over the Oretz, because only from the Shem of Adnos can you have an Oretz. From the perspective of Shem Havaya, there is no Oretz. So that's embedded in Malchus, in the Shem, in Adnos. So what do we infer from here? This very name of Malchus, this very rather midah of Malchus, this character of Malchus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, this attribute of Malchus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, this is what brings existence, and this is what creates the whole phenomenon of Olam, the world, the way the world appears at this time, as a yesh gamor v'davar mifnei atzmei, as a separate entity, and in other words, demonstrating its own yeshus, that here I am, it's about me, and davar mifnei atzmei is a separate entity on its own. A world which is eini batel b'mitzias mamash, a world which is not completely annulled to the true emes Hashem in its appearance, in its presentation, in its demonstration. So now here there is a bit of a difference, and we can appreciate again this being a midah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Here there's a difference between a melech and an am. A king doesn't create his nature, his nation. There is a nation, there's a king, and they want to get together and set up this king-subject, king-nation relationship. And they move forward with this process, and eventually ends up a healthy king. And again, we're talking about a healthy king-nation relationship, which is positive, and for that matter, it's embedded in creation. People look for leadership, people want leadership, a nation wants leadership. So again, ultimately in the last generations, it unfolded in a different way, democracy, but in the end of the day, it's part of the healthy psyche of a human being that he wants to look up to somebody as a model, or somebody who he could connect to, and somebody more experienced than him. And if it's a wise person, and if it's a teacher, a mentor, in the end of the day, this is something normal. In other words, to the extent that one is always ready to submit himself to a healthy leader. So again, it depends. There are so many different levels. If it's a master, if it's a father, if it's a mentor, if it's a teacher. And obviously the ideal is the melech, the king. When there's a true healthy king, it's a healthy process. It's not just one dominance over the other. The king accepts, the nation accepts the king, and they submit themselves to the king, and they want this king to look after them, and they want Asher Yitziyim, Asher Yivim, like it says in the pasuk regarding Yeshua, Moshe Rabbeinu, which was the iconic Yitziyim Yivim leader, which again, this is part and parcel of the, not only the way it is by the Jewish nation, but this is part of the makeup of any human being. People seek leadership. So yet the king is a separate entity, the nation is a separate entity. The king didn't create the nation. They would come together to follow this healthy process. But when it comes to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the midah of Malchus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu created this whole phenomenon of Am, which would be reflective in a world which doesn't demonstrate that automatic subservience to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the cap of Midas HaMalchus. Midas HaMalchus creates an Olam which looks like an Am. Am, in the context of the Gechalim Ayman, is extinguished from the spirit of the king. This is the Midas, this is what Midas HaMalchus accomplishes. As we can all appreciate, it's only because Hashem is a Melech, so there is the phenomenon of time and place. But here, it's with the meaning of Malchus. Alter Rebbe points out, yes, obviously everything comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. A king doesn't create a nation. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created this world, created everything. Created the people, created everything. All creations are extension of the Creator, because there's a Creator, there's creations. But here, Alter Rebbe is pointing out the meaning. The world, the way it appears, is a yesh v'davar nifra b'fnei atzmi, is similar to the Am. The Lashon Eimim is a product of that Midas of Malchus. It's part of the cap of Malchus. Because of the cap of Malchus, you have the production of a world which is an Oretz, separate from the spirit of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and they accept upon themselves the king, which is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and they becomes a Melech Aleihem, starting from Am Yisrael eventually, as it extends to the entire world, and ultimately the world itself will stand in a total state of total submissiveness to the king. But what created this phenomenon, that itself is the midah of Malchus. Creates a world which is a yesh gover v'davar b'fnei atzmi v'eino batel mitzias mamash. And if HaKadosh Baruch Hu would take up that cap, that's right, everything would return into total nothingness. Like we spoke before about the angels. And beyond. Because the angels still are an entity which are able to serve and praise and glorify and so on. But when HaKadosh Baruch Hu would take away that cap, nothing would exist. Everything would be batel. So obviously, Alter Rebbe is primarily talking about this Elam Haza, that it would return to its source in the Dvar Hashem Baruch Pivis Baruch Batel Shem B'Mitzias Mamash. It becomes extended in a complete bittul, similar to the Yichudei law. We gave the example the other day of the traffic lights. Simple, petty example, but you can appreciate it. They open it up and you see 3 equal bulbs, and they're much brighter than when the cap is on the red or the yellow, whatever, the green. But we're not looking for brightness, we're looking for something with a purpose. So you have the brightness, the streets would be much more bright, especially at night. At day, not really a difference, but nonetheless, you'd see the brightness of the lights, but then there would be chaos, there would be no order on the streets. So you have something covering up, and it camouflages the brightness of the light. Now it goes through a red glass or a green glass or a yellow glass, but there is a purpose that creates a certain or extends a certain message for those who are looking at those lights. So it camouflages, it takes away from the brightness, but it establishes a certain spirit of law and order, which could be followed by the people who are looking at that light. Similarly, but if you open it up, what would happen? Yeah, it would be brighter, but there would be chaos. Similarly, just to understand this, if HaKadosh Baruch Hu would take off the cap of Malchus, so to us it would be chaos, but in essence it would be the best thing that ever exists. If you think about it, it would have been the best thing. Again, without the purpose of Nisam HaKadosh Baruch Hu, look, what do we need all this? To be consumed to the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that should be by definition, that is something inherently good and positive, and maybe exciting. That was the Nadav Avio, their Klais HaNefesh. We just want to be part of the godly reality, losing ourselves into that godly reality without any entity at all. In other words, to lose the entire entity. The Alter Rebbe speaks about the Nei Hashem Nishmas Adam in the famous chapter Yud Ches. Actually, you could find it. It's a click away. And he explains there that this is why there's similarity, or namely Yutes, the similarity of the neshama to a Ner, because you ask the Ner, what are you jumping? Where do you think you're going? You're going to a place which is again the reason why everything gravitates downwards. The fire gravitates upwards because the shadish, the source of fire, is on high, like the Rambam points out, and the fire is looking to be consumed in its source. And you ask the fire, where are you going? Once you become part of your source, you lose your whole entity as a individual flame. And they obviously respond, theoretical, conceptual, natural respond is, I don't care really if I lose my entity as a individual flame. I just want to be part of my source, which is the shadish of Eish, the source of fire. And so too, this is default by every single Yid. But again, we're not talking about Vaid of Klais HaNefesh. We're talking about, and if Hashem would take away that cap, everything would really return into the energy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and nothing would ever be. Batel Sham B'Mitzias Mamash. It would be the whole phenomenon of Eilam. And the reason why there's an Eilam, because Hashem put on that cap of Malchus. So Malchus creates the phenomenon of Am and Oretz and so on, which again, that stark difference between the way it is by a Melech and an Am, despite again a healthy relationship, a good relationship, and this is embedded into the psyche of every human being. But nonetheless, the king does not create the nation. Baruch Hashem created the whole phenomenon. There should be Eilam, Lashon Helam, as the concealing the reality of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, creating this image of a world which is Omimot, Am, separate, this extinguished of the fire of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which comes to the cap of Malchus, again with the energy of Gvura, which covers up over the Malchus, so of the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Kaviyachal, and it creates this whole idea of a Yesh V'Davar Nifra B'Fnei Atzmai, and then you could have the process of the Tachtin coming closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, submitting themselves to HaKadosh Baruch Hu on their own, by their own initiatives, again, through the tools of what Hashem gave us, which is our holy Torah and holy mitzvahs. But the whole phenomenon just exists because there is the Midah of Malchus. Alter Rebbe just concludes over here, what is the Geder of Shem Eilam? When we say Eilam, we spoke about it a few times, that if you want to encapsulate what Eilam is, it's time and place. He says, what is Eilam? Mokim Zman, time and place and time. When we say place, it's Mizrach Ma'ariv Tzaf and Dor Maila Mata, which is south, east, west, north, and south, Maila and Mata, top and bottom. That's Mokim, and Zman is Over, Haiba Va'asi, past, present, and future, which doesn't exist over Malchus. Malchus, when there's Malchus, then Hashem Melech, Hashem Malach, Hashem Yimlech. Before that, Haya, Haiba, B'Hiya Ke'echad.